Hi, and welcome to the Improvisors podcast. I'm Neil Thomas, and this is my co-host, Kevin Jones.
Thank you, Neil. On the Improvisers podcast, we chat with performers about their histories, their practices, their conceptualizations around practice, and their current enthusiasms. Who have we got on today, Neil?
Today, it gives us great pleasure to be in conversation with Philippa Rothfield. Philippa talks of her early accidental education in the performing arts, the entwinement of her practices of dance and philosophy, and her enjoyment of and her processes for writing reviews.
Philippa also spoke of the multiplicity of factors, influences, and effects present whilst improvising, spoke of the differing experiences of embodiment across cultures, and reflected upon the nature of the self.
I hope you enjoy this conversation with Philippa Rothfield as much as we did.
Yes, it was wonderful. Let's go.
A huge welcome to Philippa Rothfield. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Improvisers podcast. We're thrilled and honoured that you can spend some time with us. Perhaps we'll start with, if you don't mind, a brief history of your involvement with dance and improvisation. How did that start for you and how has that progressed?
When I was little, we lived in London and my parents asked somebody what would be a good school to send your child to. And someone said Corona Acting Academy. And they had no interest in show business, but I was put in there and we did ballet, tap, dance, whatever. And I guess that was more or less the beginning of me coming to love dance. That didn't last long, but it did. I've sort of been dancing on and off ever since then with some serious teenager type gaps. So that was a beginning. I went to university, I did philosophy, I did honours philosophy. And then once I finished that, I basically didn't do any study for a couple of years, got involved in student politics and started dancing. And Margaret Lasica came to Monash and gave a class or two, as did Jackie Carroll. And then I just moved to dance with Margaret Lasica for 13 years. And that's the real base of my dancing and my love of dancing. And also a sense and experience of what it is to investigate movement in dance. Margaret was able to slow down class and invited people to investigate the feeling of movement and what they were doing in exercise. So it wasn't rushed. There was a lot of kind of space for working through something. She also would have one class a week that was an improv class, and she was very musical and she encouraged musicians to come. So once a week on a Monday night, and quite a few Born in a Taxi went to that. A few people from the dance improv community danced with Margaret then. That was lovely. And then, sadly, Margaret died, and that was very difficult for a lot of us who were very comfortable in that situation. But Dancehouse was up and running at that time, so I did lots of different things at Dancehouse, then came to dance with Russell Dumas on and off, learned a lot through him. And at the same time as Margaret, I did some classes with Al Wonder when he came, and Lyndall Nichols, his partner, who was a member of Margaret Lasica's modern dance ensemble, as was I. And Cecil Street, a studio in Melbourne in Fitzroy, was going. And so there was a lot of activity there that I joined. And then I probably spent most time improvisation-wise with Alice Cummins, and had some lovely time with her. And then a gap, and then more recently with Emily Bowman, who I credit with helping me stage a real comeback for my dancing. And then a few workshops with Ros Crisp, which have been a joy and a stimulus. And I'm currently dancing with Katrina Rank and Lou Duckett and a few other teachers as part of Fine Lines Dance, which is an older person's 99% women dance group. That's me.
Philippa, it's as Neil said before, we're delighted to have you on today. Partly because of your illustrious background, um, but also because of the sort of dual sort of histories that you have, both as a philosopher and a dance artist, and I guess as an improviser. So I would, and you've written so much. You've contributed to books. You've edited. You've written so much around conceptualizing improvisation, dance, and performance. So I'd invite you to speak a little about, I guess, what informs your dance practice now, philosophically. And I read the article that you wrote about that was informed by Deleuze, and the whole notion that we are emerging from a sort of set of interactive forces, and that possibly our own sort of role of choice and will is lesser so as we emerge from this sort of domain. So I'd just love you to talk a bit about that and contextualize improvisation as you see it, if that's a reasonable question.
So, first of all, I don't make the dance fit the philosophy, they spark off each other. So, I was dancing for quite some time and practicing philosophy differently, doing feminism, postmodern philosophy, continental philosophy, logic, whatever. And then philosophy of the body came to the fore and came to be quite important thought-wise. And it seemed obvious that perhaps I'd have something to say about the body because I have a dance practice. But I didn't really until I started working with Russell Dumas. There was something about learning from him that really deepened my understanding. So I'm happy to go off on a philosophical trajectory and then work with certain concepts. And you're saying, yes, one of them is working with Deleuze and his writings on Nietzsche, who talks about the body as a dynamic set of relations between forces. So rather than thinking of us as stewards of the body and, kind of the agents in control, you could take up some of those ideas and think of dancing in terms of these relations of forces where one might come to dominate and then another might come to dominate, and it's dynamic and changing. And we, as us, are in that mix. We're not always in control of it, but we do get to have some input into that mix. So I've just been interested in kind of thinking through different philosophical concepts or ways of thinking and then just see if they work in relation to the dance. But I don't make the dance fit the philosophy. It's the way I think about it, and this comes from an interview between a couple of philosophers, Michel Foucault and Deleuze, Gilles Deleuze, and they talk about theory and practice. And some people put practice on top of theory. Some people put theory on top of practice. And they said it's a bit like a kind of relay or a zigzag. And, you might have a mode of practice and it'll hit a wall of theory, and then the theory will do something and then it'll provoke something else. Just like I think we do when we're improvising. Something will go along and then it falters or stops or it's ruptured or it's interrupted, and then it gives way to something else. So the kind of back and forth without privileging one over and above another. But when I'm dancing, I'm dancing. I'm not really thinking philosophy. And when I'm doing philosophy, I'm sitting at the kitchen table with a pad and paper and sometimes plugging stuff in on a keyboard. So they're different practices, even though I love bringing one to bear on another one.
Oh, I love that idea of a looping, rolling, interacting duality. while I was thinking about this uh, interview, this conversation, I came across a quote that Joan Didion was saying, quoted as saying, that for her, the act of performing was similar to the act of writing. And I thought, oh, that'd be a great question for Philippa. The similarities and differences between performing and the act of writing.
I think there's an intensity with both, but for me, writing can be really slowed down, and you can kind of like slow your thinking with writing, and you can recraft it. I come back and back. I do an awful lot of rewriting my writing, and that rewriting clarifies my thinking. So the writing sort of provokes something. The performing is so much in the moment, and for me, a lot more adrenaline. I'm not a seasoned performer. I don't have a huge performance history, but I would say I'm probably, with writing, I'm more like a dog at a bone, and I'll be gnawing at that bone. With performance, it's sort of like walking on a precipice, and you're just sort of wanting to be a conduit and not get in the way of the action of the performance.
I suppose what interested me, what Joan was saying, was that it hinted toward the possibility that she was improvising, if you like, with her writing, and that the state that she was in was somehow like a flow, a channeling, and a getting the self out of the way.
I like her writing a lot, so I am a Joan Didion fan. She's probably a really different writer to me. Like, she's a journalist and she probably gets into a flow state. I'm a philosopher who really sort of slows down to ponder. So it'd be like adagio performance. And in fact, I like adagio. I really like slow. So maybe there's a pace issue as well. And I wonder what performance is for her. Also, I think the way you were talking, Neil, it was actually improvisational performance, not just any form of performance. So there is, I mean, when I write, I don't know what I think. So the thinking is emergent, and maybe that's a point of contact or parallel that you don't know. You think you know, but then you see what the language does, and then you have to deal with what's on the page. That's why I do so much rewriting, because then I'm meeting some writing. It's not like, oh yeah, I thought that. It's like there's thought on the page, and how am I going to respond to that, or can I shape it? A little bit like there was something that someone wrote about contact improvisation and with the falling, and you don't get to control the fall, but you can shape the fall. So, you don't get to control the thinking that is in the writing, but then you can come back and shape it. And I like shaping.
Philip, I'm going to ask a simple, maybe a very fundamental question in a way. And that really is, for you, what is improvisation? What is improvisation as a dance practice? What is improvisation as performance? And what is improvisation in the context of living? I wonder if you could comment on that.
I think there's a tension and an intention. So with improvisation, I think it's a sense of being open to circumstance and being willing to respond to, but also act or creatively work with circumstance. And circumstances change. So I would think of improvisation as opening up to a dynamic sense of change. And I suppose the art or the aesthetic might be what to incorporate. And some of those changing circumstances might be impulses. They could be one's own impulses. It could be others. It could be perceptions. It could be sounds, or it could be other people's thinking when you're reading. So anything can be a form of circumstance. I think that habit is also a form of circumstance. I think experience is. I think that training is. And sometimes some of those things can get in the way, like how we manage our habits, or when one is a little bit insecure, people can fall back on things and not feel free enough to open up to difference and change and diversity. So what do I think improvisation is? I think it's just a movement of conditions, changing conditions, and we're not always the captains of that change.
It prompts me to ask a big question, which I'm not expecting you'll give an answer in a way, but just to open up the nature of the self. And while you were talking, I was thinking, I often get very confused in improvisation around what self is. What are there multiple selves? Is there a conscious, an unconscious, a subconscious? Who is it? Who is it that's experiencing? How can I be experiencing differently? How is it that I experience things differently with different audiences? The sort of the notion of the continuity of self. So I'd love you to talk about, from, I guess, an experiential point of you as dancer and improviser, and a philosophical point of view.
Okay, well, there's a godzillion ways that I could respond to that. I think that experientially, I think we have a kind of fantasy of continuity of self, but when it comes down to it, there's diversity, diversity, diversity. And, even David Hume, he was a Scottish Enlightenment philosopher. He tried to find some core idea of what we are, and he couldn't. And so he kind of gave up on that one. He was one who was pretty honest and giving up. But, there are other philosophers think there's some core transcendental kind of element of the self, and it's kind of structural. It's not even with content. And then there's the experiential side of the self. That's where you get the existentialists and the phenomenologists. I've done a lot of work on Merleau-Ponty, and he's very interested in how we experience not so much ourselves, because he says, well, we're really just in the world. We're mainly doing stuff. You're not really thinking about yourself. You're looking out, you're acting, you're doing stuff, you're dancing, writing, picking up bits of paper. That's the self in action, I suppose. But for someone like Merleau-Ponty, it is as we experience life. Like the self is in action. The self is someone who is in a context, a milieu, a situation with others. And that can be a dance situation. It could be a situation of thought in relation to other philosophers. But then there are some, and this is more a kind of, other than Nietzsche, a kind of late 20th century approach that has looked to kind of displace the idea of some sovereign fixed self. And there are some people who have kind of developed a field of cultural studies, are really interested in the social and cultural influences on the self. And there's a lot of talk about AI or social media, and a lot of anxiety about young people really thinking, their sense of self is going to be impacted and developed in relation to these factors. And that's all important to think about. And then there's this late 20th century thinking, like people like Deleuze, who I've worked with, who really think that the self is a little bit of, it's real, but that's not where things happen. So we hope, so you could go, well, okay, I have a sense of self. I think I'm doing stuff. But what actually happens is the body's doing stuff. And then what is the body? The body is just a series of dynamic events that are kind of relations between forces, and our thoughts and our perceptions. They're forces, and there's political forces and expectations and conventions. But when there's action, we're not really the ones who are acting. We're witnesses to the action, or we come afterwards and we go, yeah, I did that, I did that, I did that. So it's a sort of retrospective kind of thing. So I suppose I'm saying there's a huge range of ways of thinking about the self, where you reckon it's really solid and grounded, or you think it's as we experience life, or perhaps we overrate the self and there's other factors at play in life. Now, where that works in dancing is another thing. And there's some parallel stuff going on there, because on the one hand, I think, you know, we can't help but work with a sense of our own selves and a belief in our own agency and trying to negotiate that agency. But at the same time, there's so much in the body and dancing and its situation and its dynamic that is more than that, and more than what we know and we understand and we're conscious of. So can we open up to some of those other things, which is to put the self a little bit to the side? You never get rid of it, but maybe it's not like, oh, hooray, everything, it's all about control, and I want control, and I want 360-degree knowledge.
Philippa, many improvisers talk about a type of thrill that happens, and I'll use the word thrill, but a type of energization, excitement that happens whilst improvising, and especially performatively when it's in relationship to witnesses or to an audience. And when you speak of the more than, it's often that it's the person feeling that they are more than themselves, that it's a process of sort of relationally with the material that's emerging and in relationship to the audience. It's relationally becoming whatever might emerge and become in that process. A process that we're shaping to a degree through our histories, our trainings, our skills, but also a process that's forming both inside and outside of ourselves, especially if we're performing with others. And so that whole sort of notion of relationally becoming that which is ourselves, that which is more than ourselves, is sort of where the richness lies for many performers. I guess I'm making a statement there, but I'd love you to comment on that from your own experience and from your own conceptualizations.
Well, I really enjoyed some of those forms of words that you're using. And I think it's like there is a performative event. It's the event. And, we are there inside the event, but we're not fully knowledgeable about what that event is. And yes, you can be thrilled. It's thrilling not to know as well, not to know what's going to happen. It's thrilling if you're not anxious about it, or you can manage the anxiety or give over or let go of it. And that relationality is really a big thing. So the thing of being watched, I think I was quite, I used to enjoy performing, and then I had a period where I didn't. And then I just had a showing at the end of last year and actually enjoyed people watching me. And I hadn't had that for a really long time. And it is that relationality. I mean, you could say, oh, that's narcissism. But I think it's not so much love or admiration, it's a connection. It's that sense of connectivity in the moment, that liveness of connectivity. And I think what's wonderful about improvisation is the not knowing exactly where it's going to go. That's just fabulous. But I did, now I'm rabbiting on, I want to add something, which is I've got a sort of double parallel way of thinking about improvisation, because there's dance improvisation, and that has a whole beautiful history that's conscious of itself as a form of improvisation. But I would also say that dancing, if you're dancing any kind of fixed material or intending to do something, that is a form of improvisation, because your body is changing at every moment. And then you're needing, if you want to sort of do a move, you have to enter into what are the factors that are going to make that possible in that moment. And as you say, Kevin, it's in the becoming of it. You don't know. You're going to do your very best to manage all of that and to connect into that. But there's so much that has to be juggled in the moment of dancing. So in that sense, dancing is itself performative, I would say. So it's not just in performance, it's the performativity. And that's improvisational as well. So it's all pretty thrilling, really, unless it's not, unless you get in the way or you get a bit paranoid or, all the things that happen.
You mentioning the AI and social media, and there's a kind of onslaught now of, I suppose, information, but it feels like it's very much to do with the intellect in the head and the senses of reading and hearing. People are absorbing all of this information and not so much of a focus perhaps on the body. And I'd be interested to hear you talk about perhaps what dance can do to the human condition as opposed to that head world. And you're uniquely placed, because it strikes me that there's part of you at least that is involved with the heady work of philosophy and deeply involved with the bodily process of dance.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that dance practices are cultural. So there are different cultural settings for dance. So it's not a universal thing. And I also think that one way of talking about that is a mind-body split or mind-body dualism. That you would have to sort of specify historically and culturally in a kind of Western setting, because there are cultural and national and ethnic groups and peoples who are incredibly bodily, and the body is so much part of their culture. So there's a cultural phenomenologist called Thomas Xordis, and he wrote a book. He collected a book of people and writing on what the body is in different cultures. And in his introduction, he was saying he was talking with someone from a non-Western setting, and they said, hey, you've given us the concept of the body. We didn't even have that. They didn't need it, whereas we've got this duality of mind and body. So that would be the first thing to say. But let me come back to our context, because I think your question, Neil, was speaking to where we might be here, where there is a lot of social media, let's say a lot of screen time. I think the body comes into play in sport in Australia. Sport's definitely lauded. Dance, less so, way less so. What does dance give us? What can dance do for us? I think, people get pleasure out of dance? I think that I know people who aren't dancers who really enjoy doing Zumba and all these different classes, and they're doing it with other people. And that's really nice. There's a sense of agency, a sense of pleasure, the relationality you were talking about, Kevin, participation, sensation, I think feeling in the body where it's not just pathology. There's an author called Drew Leader, and he's interested in phenomenology and medicine. And a lot of the discussion of the body is where there's a problem with the body. So, oh, I've got a sore foot or I've got a sore back. But dance can be a pleasure and a sense of activity, and also maybe a giving over to something that's not this idea of some mental overseer that is in control. I think that's a delusion, but I think we have that delusion. It's a very living delusion that we have of, this mind that can range over things. So the doing stuff with the body's a nice antidote. But for me, I think it's pleasure and it's aesthetic beauty. I love dancing. I love moving. I love doing people's choreography. Even if it's naff, I like doing it. And I like improvising. But not all of it beautiful. I like to surprise myself. And I especially working with Ros Crisp. She is a mistress of displacement strategies that are not about what something looks like. I mean, I've done a number of workshops with Deborah Hay, but I wouldn't say they're improvisational. She's just got a very radical take on what counts as choreography. But it does ask of you to give over an awful lot. I like the giving over. So surprise as well. Maybe a lot of our lives aren't surprising. Dance is surprising.
Philippa, I'm going to bring it back to relationality in the context that many of the persons we've chatted with are performers. So they're bringing their improvised practices to the gaze of an audience. And that relationality is a rich part of obviously what is emerging, how it's emerging, and how the performer, if I use that term, is responding to the material and to the audience response, I guess, to what is happening. Could you comment a little bit on that relationship as you've come to know it as a performer? And maybe even conceptually as well, that relationship between audience witness and performance and how it shapes and how that interaction lives.
I am not a very experienced performer. So when you say that, I bet everyone else you've interviewed has a stronger base of experience to fall back on. But I do perform when I speak and speak about my work, and I also perform when I teach. And it's incredibly connected with others. I'm extremely aware of not just how things are landing, but there's these circuits of energy that flow back and forth. So I think you talk about the thrill. There is a thrill of perhaps it does take energy to set those circuits going, but when they're going, they really do go. You're not the only one in charge of that. You just maybe provoked something. So I think it's that flow of energy. People might talk about affect, not in the sense of emotion, but affect as a sense of dynamic change. So I think to speak about relationality or the relation between performer and audience, maybe I would insert something to do with change, dynamism, flow, and difference. So it's not just a closed circuit, but it's something that keeps changing in the movement between one and another, between performer and audience. And then there's a whole lot of movements of perception. And Neil, you were talking about, let's say, the multiplicity of selves in performance. I mean, there's a heap because it's so intense. You know, you have zoing, 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 and you don't have time to dwell on it. That's why afterwards is always a bit weird, because it's like, how was that? You're not even sure. So I think this relationality is one that's changing and diverging all the time. It's like a facet on a jewel or something, and the light's going off on it. So it's not coherent, changing, flow, might be things coming from one, things coming from another, and then adaptations on everybody's part. I mean, being an audience member's a thing too. You know how you drift in and out, or you're good, you're there, you're involved, you're not. So everyone's having these broken experiences, if you like, not in a bad way, but just let's let go. It's not all this one thing. We're not one thing.
Could I just tail that with a passing comment before handing it to Neil? There's something about that relational emergence of material that's happening, call it material or of experiencing. And I suppose we use the word thrill a fair bit today, but I suppose what might be the thrill of it is something about the surprise, the curiosity, the emergent material that is happening that can't be predicted or predicated upon. And that going for that ride and in some ways crafting, forming, responding, living it out relationally with an audience is possibly where the thrill and where the skill of performance lies. So I just wanted to somehow toss that there, maybe for further comment on, or to somehow summarize something about that.
I'm now reading this social scientist, I suppose he is, or studies of science, someone called Bruno Latour, and he has this idea. He's working with the self as an assemblage of human and non-human elements. But there's just one thing he wrote where he said, I'm always surprised by what I do. So in a way, and he's really good at obstacles, and we hit obstacles and then we're creative in relation to them. So I think that the world is our audience as well. You know, like we have there's the sovereign deluded self and everything, and you do something and it's not quite what you thought. And so it's that you're talking about this becoming or the surprise. Nothing's like what we thought. Well, it is a bit. You go, yeah, I knew that, or I told you so, but mostly not really. You're sort of catching up with things. And maybe catching up, but open to maybe not needing to know. I just think, you know, there's a lot of people talk about knowledge, and like, yeah, all right. But it's not all it's cracked up to be.
I love that. I'd like to go back to talking a little bit about writing and what do you think's going on there in that process of pen to paper or fingertips to keyboard?
I think it's all about, or a lot of what's going on is the setting or the context within which the writing's occurring. So if I'm writing in my diary or writing a shopping list, that's really different to me working on a review. So I just wrote a review. I went to the Lyon Dance Biennale and wrote something about that recently. For me, the writing I think you're talking about is usually some sort of project. I have a project. I've got to write something about artistic agency or about improvisation, or I'm reading Bruno Latour and I'm trying to sort out what is he saying in this chapter or in this book. So it's always got a context, and then the writing is, for me, this is personal, some sort of grappling with that context. So it might be, it's a project. I mean, Merleau-Ponty talks about that in his existentialism, that the human being, and Jean-Paul Sartre, also Simone de Beauvoir, that we have projects in the world. So I think that writing is a form of project, like a school project, and then depends what the parameters are, what you're trying to do with the writing. It's very provisional for me, super provisional. Like I say to people, because it's true for me, usually the first version of anything is crap. And then I either throw it away or I play with it a lot. So I'm not a writer who has a thought and then puts it on the page, but I do know a philosopher who does that. He's a really different thinker to me. So there's probably some relationship between thinking and writing. And then the thought isn't all mine. So even if I'm writing about the Lyon Dance Biennale, I'm responding to the thought of the artists and the dancers and the choreographers and the work, and that thinking, it's mediated through me, but that it's coming through me, and then I'm responding to that or doing something with it a bit more cheeky, like creative, or deploying it, so it's not always reactive. Sometimes it's like, you know what, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to see how that's going to work.
Philippa, you've have done a lot of reviews over time, and obviously still currently doing so. As a reviewer, I'd love to know a little about what that means to you, what it implies, and how you cite yourself in that world of reviewing, watching performance, and responding, and then committing that response to a review.
It started with Keith Galash and Virginia Baxter in a beautiful publication called RealTime that came out every 2 months. And Keith's idea was that he was interested in the reviewer's response to the work and our experience of the work. I was also not told what to do. I had a huge amount of freedom, didn't have to write any footnotes, so that was really good. Then there was the ethical question, which is really a big thing for me, of how you speak to somebody's work. People put a lot of work into making work, and I don't think I've ever written that anything was bad, and hardly ever said anything was good. So I don't kind of think of reviewing as a scale, 5 stars, 4, 3. I know some people have to because they write for the daily paper, fine. But I haven't had to do that. So I try and engage with the work at some level, like what are people trying to do, or what came across, or what was it? Mostly, there's lots of different things that you can say. There's also, and this comes back to your question, Neil, that reviewing is writing. You're not just offering a perspective, you're writing something down, or if you were speaking, you'd say it. So the writing has a life of its own for me, and I actually really enjoy reviewing type writing. It's fun. It's different to philosophy, but there's just the need, duty, whatever it is, to kind of respect the work and the workers behind the work. That's part of it. So I used to say, rule of thumb, don't write anything down I wasn't prepared to say to the artist. And I still stand by that. But it's fun. I love reviewing. I really do.
Yeah, I think a hard review can be really tough on the creators. I think it's...
Well, why do it? I mean,
Yeah.
even why bother? I've just been to Fringe. I've seen loads of Fringe things. Spirit of the Fringe. I wanted to give it to something that I didn't even understand it. It was like I couldn't hear half of it. But I thought, yeah, that is a bit Spirit of the Fringe. Like let people be.
Maybe there's something, I was thinking as you were talking, maybe there's something in this notion of, in the act of creation as a writer, a dancer, or an improviser, there's something about allowing yourself to be open to the various influences, whether they're internal, external. And in the case of a review, you're sort of privileging a certain perspective, the desire to write something. So do you think there's a possibility, or that makes sense, the notion of privileging influences while you're, say, dancing, for instance?
Oh, well, that's different. I was thinking that, reviewing is a form of privilege and it is a form of power too. So there's that, because I'm not just writing in my diary, it is published, so we could look at that. But now you've moved on to something else. So let me try and catch up with that. So you're thinking of, well, yes, I think so. The idea of privilege or privileging, which is an activity, it's like a form of agency. And, in the sort of Nietzschean Deleuze material, Nietzsche talks about one force acting another. That's privileging something. Or if you're improvising, which impulse are you going to pick up on? So by picking up, that's a form of selection. Selection is a form of privileging. And then you see, and it's not just picking, it's not like pick a box, it's an activity. So what kind of selection is happening? So privileging, to use your term, Kevin, is a process, isn't it? We don't know where it will go or how it will go, especially when there's others involved. But you can throw things in there, and yes, you can kind of decide to pick up on things or not pick up on things. The other thing I did want to say was that I haven't yet said, and that is, we've sort of come to it a little bit on the question of the self, but there's another term that comes through Deleuzian philosophy, and that's the idea of subtraction. So sometimes we think of creativity as you're adding something to the world all the time. But if you think of the self that can get in the way of improvising and performing, can you take something away from that? And if you do, you can maybe destabilize yourself or destabilize some of the structures or habits or what's happening in that kind of narrative improv-y way. Pull a thread out. Take something away so that something can emerge. And I think you would say that also with respect to our own habits or our own performance habits, that we've probably all got a performing type self, and we don't want to be like that all the time. So can you subtract? Can you destabilize?
Thanks for bringing that up, Philippa. It's because many people that we've chatted with do talk about habits and the efforts that they make as performers and as improvisers to acknowledge their habits, but to actually sort of liberate themselves from the confines of habits. So thank you for bringing that in, that sort of subtraction. We're reaching a point now where we're virtually coming to the end of the podcast. You mentioned before, and I'm thinking of currency for you, and you mentioned you're reading Bruno Latour. But I'm wondering what else is current for you. Where are your enthusiasms? Where are your sort of aspirations? Where is life in its fullness of living for you at the moment?
Holidays, puppy, dancing, more dancing, learning Japanese. The world's pretty not going so well. What to do about that? That's a big deal. That's very current. yeah, just living well, I think, and all whatever that means. What is it to live well or to connect with people? But I'm really enjoying my dancing, I have to say. But I like cooking, I like eating, I watch a lot of TV, lots of stuff. Is that current? Current is what's happening at the time. Current is now, really.
Great.
So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being available today for your rich reflections and comments. Neil, over to you.
I'd like to thank you for your frankness and your freshness. It's so beautiful to be in the presence of someone who's really feel like you're really in the present. So, and what a wonderful present
Oh,
for
well,
us all.
it's been a pleasure just chatting with you both. So thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Philippa.
Thank you.